Call to order the flood board meeting. We have an urgent action item. We need to approve meeting by remote teleconference as per the state of California state of emergency to allow this to happen. And I think we just have to vote to approve that.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Okay. All right. An open forum. Is there any member of the public that is attending that wishes to speak to anything not on the agenda?
Looks like we have no attendees.
Public.
No attendees at the moment.
Okay. And I see Stephanie's coming on board. Okay.
Yep, I'm here. Hi. Sorry, I can't get my video to work. I'm going to keep working on it. I'm sorry, but I'm here.
Okay. So the approval of the meeting minutes of August 9th. Any corrections, changes? Is there a move to approve?
Make a motion
Anybody
to
have a
approve the
move to
August
approve
9th
those?
minutes.
Wait, did you move to approve?
I make a motion to approve the August 9th minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So discussion items, RJ and Chris. The October storm with the 7-foot tide.
Yeah, so definitely a historic event. I'm gonna let Chris lead the conversation and obviously here for additional comments or Q&A. So go ahead and take it away, Chris.
Okay, so like I said, we'll be discussing the flooding from October 24th and then an update on the storm drain master plan. So on October 24th and 25th, the town received up to 11 inches of rain in 48 hours, which is the equivalent of a 100-year storm. So town staff responded to several flooding events, and we documented the flooding mainly in Mariner Cove and on the east side of the town. And at around 2:35, there was a 5.4-foot tide and then a 1.6-foot storm surge. So together around 7 feet of tidal activity, which caused a lot of backup in Mariner Cove. So just going through the pictures, top left one is on Paradise as you turn into Seawolf, and the whole road was underwater as well as the sidewalks. Bottom right is a picture coming from the other way, so it's backing up a little bit onto Paradise. So on the left side, this is just a little bit farther up the street at Eptide Passage. And you can see, in the bottom left, the hydrant's halfway underwater. Some trees fell over from the water back up, and it went up Spindrift in both directions. And then on the right side, Seawolf at Flying Cloud, also underwater at the end. Other side of Seawolf at Flying Cloud, and then probably the most water we encountered was Seawolf at Golden Hind. It seemed like 2 to 3 feet of water in the deepest parts on the road. And it definitely just seemed like all of this was because of, there's nowhere to drain to when at high tide. So on the east side of the neighborhood, this is Eptide Passage, which we're used to having some backup here, so that wasn't a big surprise. And then what was a surprise was on the right side. This is our pump station on Golden Hind at K Passage, and somehow the outfall pipe from the pump station has sprung a leak. And so it created a sinkhole and water was bubbling up out of the ground. And you can see water and mud were there, cycling back to the road. So it's basically just going in a circle. So we've temporarily installed some erosion control measures there and are looking to do an emergency repair pretty soon on that pump station. But the pump station is still functioning, so that's the good news. So going farther east, the left picture is on Paradise, kind of next to Marin Country Day School, and you can see rainwater is accumulating on the right side of the street, and the storm drains couldn't keep up with it. It's either that or the tides weren't letting water through, so it was overtopping the road. So that's one thing we are planning to look at as part of our current Paradise Drive Complete Street project. And the bottom right was another area where there was some localized flooding next to the Cove School, covering, the westbound lane. So we'll have to investigate that as a part of a future project too. Top left is the floodgate for San Clemente Creek. And then also this is the outfall for the San Clemente pump station. So just a lot of water movement there, but it wasn't quite overtopping the levee or the wall. And then bottom right is next to the Tesla dealer on Casa Buena. And our recent storm drain improvements farther down the road definitely helped. I did notice later in the day as I was leaving and the rain picked up, it started to fill up the southbound lane. So eventually we're going to have to look into improving the storm drain system there and doing some more modeling, hopefully as part of the storm drain master plan to just improve the drainage there. And that was everything we documented. There was a few other locations on the west side of town, but it was pretty small in comparison. So didn't add any pictures of those locations. So any questions?
Any questions for the board members?
Not really a question. This is Brian Schnarr. Thank you for going through this stuff. I think as a resident of that community, it was an eye-opening experience. I'm sure Bob felt similarly as the levels rose quickly, especially as the tide rose. And a lot of people in the neighborhood, had some problems with flooding. So it was a big experience for those of us that live in that community down there. Certainly something that's causing a lot of questions that are going to me about what is the plan. It's pretty ironic given the challenges we've had to develop a plan on the long term, but I think we need to redouble our efforts on this. Obviously we really like the drainage improvements that are going on in that community, but those things are not really responding to this problem in a meaningful way. So anyway, I guess my comment for the board and for everybody is how do we rise to meet this challenge? Because it's probably going to be more frequent for us.
Brian, was there any garage flooding on your street?
What we got is on Pacific Queen, my neighbor, they went through their crawl space straight up to the floorboards. And they had a broken sump pump, unfortunately. So that took that out. And then the house down on the corner of Pacific Queen and Golden Hind, the water came in on the Pacific Queen side and went down underneath their foundations on their addition. And that almost got to their floorboards on their side. So the water was quite deep at places underneath houses. But it's been too wet, frankly, for people to do any remedial measures these last 3 weeks. A lot of fences are being built, but it's been too hard to get contractors out here to get things done for some of my neighbors. And we're hitting another big storm now. So we just all kind of hope. I will say that we've been doing okay. It drains when the tide's low, it drains better. So that's an improvement. But the high tide problem is a problem we've got to put our minds around it.
Okay. Chris, I had a question on the K Passage pump station. What do you estimate that the level is where a high tide would sort of come over from the bay, and just run down that easement? In the past, I thought it was around a 7/6 tide, but did you have any sense of it looking at it this time at high tide?
Yeah, I mean, during that storm, you can see it was pretty close. I didn't measure it, but it may have been, additional 8 to 12 inches might have started to overtop, but I'm not totally sure. That's just based off, the picture I took. But yeah, it wouldn't take much more to make it over that.
Yeah, that would be a good place to put some fill, just to, close off that end if the neighbors would also connect with it to keep it from spilling over and then just having a continuous recycling of trying to pump the bay out.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have questions with respect to the data that we capture, how we store it, and how we use it in the future. So, for instance, the photos are great graphic evidence of what happened at a certain point in time at a certain location. But I wonder if there's any set of data based on data loggers or any other information that can be more than maybe purely anecdotal information that we can, again, capture and put in tables or in plans, right, that show at a certain time how the flooding was upon a plan. And also on tables, right, on spreadsheets, on things like that. The reason for those are twofold. First, again, the graphic information is, a great visual aid for anybody to see what's going on, but that's where it stops, right? There's no data, there's no continuity, there's no way to store that and make a good use of it. The good use of it comes when one uses that data to calibrate a hydraulic model that eventually can be run to simulate scenarios that then can be corrected through actions, whether increasing diameter of pipelines or putting new pump stations, or those what-if scenarios that cost a fortune in the real life with a model are relatively cheap, right? But the model is as good as it's been designed and it's been calibrated. So anyway, so that's the question is, what sort of data do we collect? And what do we do with that data? And I guess that's the way that I would like to present the question.
Yeah, so I'm happy to answer that. I mean, so, we don't have set up datums or elevation or elevation gauges at this point. I think it's a good point. And perhaps we should invest in that and have those set up and have some sort of a logging system, especially during these higher events. And I think, given the next topic on the agenda, I think we should maybe table some of this and get into that and potentially seek out that opportunity. But I think it's a fair point, and let's continue that on the next item.
Yeah, the one other point is thinking about in Mariner Cove, any additional check valves. Yeah, I mean, with a high tide and a rainstorm event, you can't really evaluate it. You really can only evaluate that at a king tide where it's backing up through those outfalls that don't have check valves in them. The ponding data that had been accumulated in the past, there were some pretty good maps that showed, where a lot of the street ponding had accumulated. Now, this was primarily rainfall events that just weren't able to drain. And so there was a good deal of work on that as far as mapping those in Mariner Cove and Marina Village in particular, and I guess Marina Estates also. So that is data that has been captured, and potentially this could add to it.
Yeah, I would say that the update from Chris, along with Brian and Ramon's questions, are a perfect segue into the next topic, because a 5/4 tide with a storm surge is nothing. If it had been a 7-foot tide with a 1.6, I mean, add 1.5 feet to what we just saw, I think it points towards just the beginnings of the future that we're going to face, where every watershed has to drain to an area with an active powered pump in it. Maybe not next year or even in 10 years, but eventually the land side is going to have to be pumped dry during all major storms, basically. But it's probably something we're planning for, but not quite right around the corner.
Bob, before I move on, and yeah, I like the segue, but in terms of the October event, the Marina Village came out pretty well. I remember walking around, and the slot drains had worked excellent. And so the Marina Village withstood that. But I like Ramon's point, and because when I walked around the levee, and then also when the latest king tide, but just a couple weekends ago, I was just shocked by seeing the level of the bay compared to my street and you know, Paradise Drive and San Clemente. And so that'd be an excellent data point, because I was going to ask how, I would love to know how much higher the bay elevation was compared to street elevation. And thankfully there's that dike, that levee that's protecting Marina Village as we speak. And I couldn't help recall public meetings that someone said levees don't work. So let's continue, but that'd be a data point I would love to see, how much higher the bay was at high tide compared to street and surface level. Thanks.
Good point. Shall we move on to the storm drain master plan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So Chris, you can share your screen and I'll talk us through the presentation.
Sure, 1 second. Okay.
All right, so yeah, quick update. So I know this has been on the CIP for some time, and you know, even now was still a challenge getting that RFP out and kind of going through that process. But we did get 2 proposals from 2 very qualified firms, Schaff and Wheeler and Wood Rogers. I felt they were both very competent and would have hired either of them. We ultimately selected Schaff and Wheeler, and we aren't currently under contract yet. We're still kind of ironing out scope, and I think that'll be a good discussion at the end of this presentation. But they have a lot of experience in the area. Chris, next slide. So they've worked on similar storm drain master plans for a lot of our neighboring agencies, Larkspur, Mill Valley, San Rafael, and possibly the county. And so not only do they, you know, work in Marin, but they know a lot of the watersheds, and I'm sure understand a lot of the kind of precipitation patterns and tidal patterns. And so we thought that was a bonus or a plus when we were evaluating their team. Next slide. So these are kind of the major buckets or components within the master plan. So, you know, condition assessment, you know, really getting the existing conditions on the pipelines, asset management, that's the similar, also doing the similar thing for the pump stations. And then, sorry for the background noise. And then really taking all that information and putting it into a software program that can start to help us understand, you know, all of our information, and then use it to develop a model. That model will then be used to drive a lot of our capital improvement needs and priorities, along with, you know, discussing those options with flood board and the public, and how we best prioritize those projects, and also folding in kind of the financing component. And so, you know, we might project how much money on an annual basis we might have for, you know, flood improvements, and that kind of drives, you know, what to fund or implement in given years. Next slide. So these are just, obviously some of the, specific things that will get analyzed. I've already mentioned several, but, looking at pipes, pump stations, influence of creeks, tidal, understanding king tide events, settlement, which has been brought up several times, and I think is a very important factor. And then just, more substantial pipe failures. Next slide. So one of the deliverables, the end of this will look something like this, but much more detailed. So we do have kind of known bits and pieces of our pipe network here. And so the legend here shows the pipe types, so RCP, reinforced concrete pipe, PVC, et cetera. And then beyond that, each one will also be rated with, kind of condition index. So we can have a system and a method toward, rehabilitating the pipes that need it most. And then also as part of the modeling, we'll identify the ones that are potentially undersized and needs to be increased in capacity. And this is a tool that beyond the Storm Drain Master Plan effort, it'll be a tool that staff can use to just have a better and more in-depth understanding of our system and can apply it year after year beyond that. Next slide. So here is just some kind of things that they'll look at and consider with respect to pipes. So, each one, and the one that kind of jumps out that I think maybe needs a little more explanation is just, risk assessment. So they'll look at, if a certain area or if a certain pipe fails or leads to flood, what is the damage? So that also gets factored into these decisions. If a large pond forms, but it ponds an open field, obviously that's less important than if it's ponding a lot of, residential or commercial properties. So, and then some of the other things, just a lot of field assessment, and then where needed, and this is kind of just a value engineering approach. We will do CCTV inspections, but we could spend, upwards of $600,000+ if we wanted to video every pipe, but that's not a cost-effective way at using the town funds for this overall effort. Next slide. So yeah, this is a common site. I'm sure everyone has seen at least a photo of this, but this is what, a corrugated metal pipe looks like after, it's corroded at the bottom. And so we'll obviously capture these, and the screen, the image on the bottom right is kind of this proprietary device that they've developed. It's a GoPro with some pretty heavy duty Maglite cameras that they're able to project down pipes and see quite a ways. So I think it's a cost-effective tool to analyzing these. Next slide. So yeah, these are some of the things that will be looked at: pump stations, the force main component of these pump stations, the discharges, how the outfalls look. Some of the outfalls have, wing walls with structural failures or rebar that's exposed, that's corroded, safety issues related to how they're maintained. And so we hope to capture those and come up with a systematic plan on and prioritizing when to address one and in what order. Next slide. So this is what they call a 1D model. And so this will show at various, most of these are going to be catch basin inlets or outfalls. The color is going to indicate the severity of the flooding at specific locations. There is a more in-depth method that they call 2D modeling that is an option, but I think our initial approach is to start with the 1D model, and then if there are specific areas that need more advanced analysis, we can look at adding that additional service once we have more information. Next slide. So all in all, this is the kind of summary of their scope and fee. So you can see a big part of it is that data collection component, you know, boots on the ground, reviewing all the pipes, reviewing all the pump stations, putting that into a database, organizing that database, getting it all up to speed, up to date, accurate. And that's really kind of the largest piece. Something else, you know, obviously pipe condition and pipe capacity are important, but, you know, I wanted to also really use this effort to do some of the things that we wouldn't be able to do with our own staff bandwidth and capabilities. And so really doing that modeling, also looking at our retention basins. So one of the kind of value engineering approaches there is to draw them down and potentially do a drone survey from above. And so I forget the exact dollar amount for that component, but it was a lot more cost effective than doing a, you know, bathymetric survey. I mean, I think for the price that we're able to do the drone survey for all of them, it's about the price you would pay to do a, you know, bathymetric survey for one of them. So, and I think that'll get us very good data to answer a lot of the questions that we need to ensure that they have capacity for the events that we expect. So yeah, you know, there's identified problem areas. So that's kind of the urgent list. And then from there, if we need to do more in-depth analysis, we can always, you know, expand the scope once we have a better idea of this initial effort. You know, a big dialogue and discussion and a lot of, you know, technical analysis and various inputs on how to prioritize the CIP. I think that's a big important goal here. Obviously, you want to walk out of this with, you know, a 5 to 10 year game plan on what we want to attack and roughly have it at least by tiers. I don't want to say in sequential because, you know, it's hard to go in sequence when you have projects of varying funding amounts, but at least have tiered approaches to what's most important, kind of high, medium, low at a minimum. And then kind of rounding it out, just a financial component, you know, doing some approximations of the funding levels we think we'll have for flood control. Also considering potential grants that might supplement that, and then eventually putting that all into one document that is reviewed and goes in a draft form and then takes comments and gets updated into a final version. But all in all, it's, you know, it's a big effort. It's a multi-year effort. It's about a 2-year effort. It's also, you know, a big investment. It's just under $500,000. So even for this, it's still significant. And so that I'll open up to questions or comments, and we can talk about refining this or possibly adding it. But just at the same time, you know, do realize we're still at a big investment as this baseline shows. Any questions?
Any questions, board members?
So thanks, RJ. In 2007, when AN West did their flood control system analysis, they had tables they called their point of concentration tables that were kind of what I was alluding to before, understanding what a 100-year flood would look like at different locations based on the size of the watershed above it. And they have these tables with, if I can see it, but each line is a different little basin that shows the size of it and the materials, so you can estimate the flow from a 100-year storm. Do you know if item number 4 here includes a similar analysis? So you'd be able to know what a 100-year storm would do at a given location. And that's just something that can be useful in the future if and when you guys raise Paradise Drive or any levees are raised. We would want to know how much water we're going to impound behind that levee during a storm and know how to size equipment to get that water out of there?
I do not know the answer to that, but I will definitely look into that. I was not familiar with that table, so I think that or something, and it was kind of on the same thought that Ramon brought up earlier. I see the value in whether it be for educational and for our own tracking methods, but the idea of having known locations where during these events we can go to, have a calibrated staff gauge that has a tide elevation to it and measure it and see where we are. I definitely see the value in that. And also the table.
I think when you talk to the engineers, you might bring them the 2007 report, and you don't need to redo it if the stuff that's in this report is valuable and accurate, or it can be incorporated into a system that you guys can use. Maybe these point of concentrations could actually be shown on the town's GIS map, so you can use them internally to kind of plan stuff out. You might end up, moving water from one detention basin to another because it makes more sense, for instance.
Yeah, I think we already provided them with the old stormwater master plan. And I think from our discussion with them, they were saying that the old model that AN West used was kind of more of an on-paper calculations, and they want to use some more modern modeling, like on computers. So we just have to decide which model we want to go with.
Great, thanks.
Other questions?
Yes, I have some questions and comments. So when you're saying about, well, let me start a different way. I think one of the problems that I have encountered when we hire consultants to do this type of work for the different agencies that I worked in the past, one of the problems that one may encounter is that we get a great product that gets filed, and it's a very short-lived. So with that in mind, what I would suggest is that, RJ, I think you were already alluding to it, but it would be great if one of the outcomes of this exercise is a list of actionable items, meaning projects that would be prioritized, as you were saying, so that we can get right on it, right after the work is done. It's like on day one, we can hit the ground running, and we got some places that we can take action. Whether that is something that we can do right away because it's relatively economic and cheap, and we got the money to do that, or because it's an effort that we need to save for, and therefore the town can put a fund to put your savings, and when we got enough, we can tackle that one. But having a list of projects would be great. Another thing that is usually a good idea is to separate those projects into capital improvement projects versus what the R&R and the renewal and replacement type of projects are. Both because the type of funding that we can get is different, but also because the attention of a staff to do the routine renewal and replacement versus the more with a more body type of project, the capital improvement project, that would be good to have the differentiation. Another thing that comes along with this thing that I was saying before about having a great document that then gets filed is, are we going to develop in-house knowledge about how to, say, run the model, for instance, or grow this in the future? Or are we planning on some sort of long-term plan to gain support from outside consultant services? Meaning that this model, it's a picture a certain moment in time, right? But as life moves on, we do changes, and someone needs to keep it alive and to maintain it and to run it and to calibrate it. Things have changed here and there. That is easier said than done. I mean, there's a type of expertise, and also someone needs to become familiar and get enough experience in all this to keep it alive. So sometimes it's not feasible for relatively small agencies to develop the in-house staff that can spend all this time on this. So I don't know what is the plan. And going back to the model selection, I don't know exactly what you mean by that and what your options are, but I would be wary of models that are proprietary, that will link, that can only be operated or used by a certain type of consultant, and therefore you are linked by the hip, whether you like them or not in the future. So to have a different sort of model that comes, that is available to the public at a cost, is something to consider.
Thank you. Yeah, let me respond to a few of those. So I think, I very much come from a project-focused kind of mindset, and so that's really something that I'm always putting at the forefront. Maybe oftentimes too much, but as we go through this process, that's really where that's for me. That's the whole reason we're doing this, right? So that we have a playbook. I don't feel like I have a playbook looking back at a 2007 document, and so that's why I thought this was an important exercise to really invest in and give myself and the rest of the staff and the flood board and everyone, council, the tools to make the right decisions and put us all in a better position to safeguard our communities from flooding. So I very much, that's the goal. And using kind of the climate adaptation assessment as a little bit of a example, and it may not be completely apparent to the community or maybe in the flood board about kind of the things that we're doing. But, the reality is we are jumping on a number of things. That was just, we only finished it in May of this year. We've already started design work on our Paradise Complete Streets project, which at one point was identified as a short-term strategy. This project, the Storm Drain Master Plan, was actually one of the items that was listed as a priority. And I really think that this is a big piece of that to me. Obviously I think the climate adaptation assessment looked at understanding elevations with respect to tidal, but we didn't really have any engineering backup on, how things flow in storm drain pipes and pump stations. And so now we're going to invest in that. And so I think this will really make our understanding much more robust. It'll also give us a lot of the confidence and frankly ammunition we need to push forward important projects, even if we're met with some opposition from the public, right? If we have this, hydraulic model and all of this engineering background, that's really gonna go a long way. And I don't feel like we at times had that during the climate adaptation assessment, which I think is why, it had some bumpy moments to it. And so, yeah, this will, I think, pave the way for addressing a lot of these more difficult and maybe contentious projects, but much needed projects for the town. Noted on the CIP versus maintenance, I think that's important too, given that the various funding streams have different rules. And then on the in-house one, so I mean, right now we really have one staff member who's, has a strong background in GIS, which is really what you need to effectively manage this program. And so we do have limitations, and she primarily works on the sanitary side. I think the goal is to update this in our Innovise software, which is one that we already have a license, and licenses aren't cheap. They're, can't remember if it's $35,000 or $60,000. So you want to use what you have. But to your point, it's not a proprietary software, so that's good. It's proprietary, but can be accessed, and we're not locked into working with one consultant for the next 20 years.
Yeah, with
okay.
Yeah. And yes, these things are not cheap, but that's I said available to the public for a fee. That is
right. Right. And so we've already invested on that on the sewer side, and so we'll have that. Hopefully, it'll just expand our own ability to use it, at least from a user standpoint. Obviously, inputting, we can do some of that, but to do a large scale modeling, probably you're looking at consultants. I'm sure if Chris went to some trainings, he might be able to get up to speed and be efficient at it, but really I don't think it's appropriate use of a senior engineer's time to kind of spend significant hours on GIS. So I think we probably would, for those efforts, either bring someone in on a part-time basis. There's some consultants or retired GIS folks that can work for us at reasonable hourly rates. So if there is an update that's needed, that would be an option. If it's a small update, we do have some in-house capabilities through Fernanda Stefanik, one of our project managers. And I don't know if I missed any of the other items.
No, I think that you covered everything. Thank you so much.
So other comments?
RJ, Brian here. I'm only curious what the timeline is on this particular project.
Yeah, so it's roughly a two-year project. And so that, at the end of 2 years, that's the goal, is to have a approved document. We might find that halfway in or 2/3 of the way in, we know enough about one particular area that all of a sudden elevates into action. That can happen from time to time. I mean, especially if we come across a large, important pipeline that's completely corroded. I mean, we're not going to wait till the end of the 2-year cycle to jump on it. But I think, yeah, as information is generated and if it's compelling enough, we can use it immediately if we think that's the way to go. And yeah, I as mentioned earlier, and I think before we leave the talk, I do want to kind of get a sense of I think two things. One, I think we're all kind of thinking about the same types of projects in the future, and how much do we want to invest in some tools that can later become or currently become educational components, such as these, elevation scaff gauges, or anything of that nature. I think, the one that, I think we all have heard of or seen is, when you go to San Anselmo and they've got that one right in, downtown, and it says like, this was the level at 1982. But something like that at a couple key locations where you could stand on the ground and know that you're standing on, 6 feet elevation, and you could go sit there on a tide and kind of see where it's at. I think I could see the value in that. And so is that something we want to add? And if we're going to add, that probably involves some survey work in those vicinities. And so while we're there, is there other things you want to pick up? Do we want to do some survey work in key spots on Golden Hind? That'd be a question I have for Flood Board.
So just in following up on that, Roy Wolford will be pleased that you put settlement in there as one of the things to evaluate. Mm-hmm. And I thought that we had discussed locating some landmarks in Mariner Cove and other places that had an accurate survey from 30 years ago or so, and to see if we can determine the degree of settlement that's happened since then. I remember the study from the 90s that did borings, got the depth of the bay mud, how much compaction we were, supposedly had up to that point, and how much there was going forward. And as I reflect back on it, I would have expected to see evidence of a lot more settlement if those projections were accurate. I sort of judge it from the dock in my backyard, knowing what a 7-foot tide, looked like 40 years ago and what a 7-foot tide looks like now. And I don't see too much difference. I mean, maybe inches, but just a few inches. And so maybe the settlement that was projected really wasn't as great as they told us. And is there a plan to resurvey some of these landmarks?
So yeah, in the scope before you, I don't think there is a detailed topo survey on that. Certainly LiDAR would be an option, and we already have a lot of that that was already done recently from the county. So I think we'd be expanding the scope in excess of this number, which I think is worth considering.
RJ,
but I think, yeah.
I think they did include 3 days of surveying in here, but they didn't really specify what that was. So it could also be extra.
Okay. Yeah. And then, so let me, getting to, I don't necessarily see this project being the best one for the 100-foot geotechnical borings. I think those are very expensive, you know, to do a handful of borings like that. I would not shock me if it's $100,000, you know? So, and to just to understand the settlement that may have been occurred compared to what's future, I would rather see it in what is the elevation today. And so you might be able to, yeah.
That's actually what I was asking for.
Yeah.
Of these landmarks that we had 30 years ago, can we resurvey just a few of those, just to see what the degree of settlement has been, you know, since then, as based, and then compare that to maybe what the projections are. So really, I'm talking about just a small number of landmarks where we do have accurate survey data on it. I was not suggesting we redo the borings or anything.
Yeah, no, I think there's value in that, having that, you know, that topo data and with some theoretical projections on settlement beyond that. But if we do kick off, you know, a more substantial project, anything that, you know, involves, I'm just trying to use my words carefully, any discussion of flood barriers or anything along any of the Bayside communities, I think that would possibly warrant the more in-depth geotechnical boring at that time as part of that project. But at least getting some updated info on it, some, you know, real life, highly precise and accurate data on elevations today, along with some projections on settlement in the future, I think would go a long way.
Yeah, no, I would agree. The other thought I had in regard to this survey, looking at the Shorebird Marsh Pump Station and also the High Canal, immediately adjoining both those are Larkspur flood control projects with, you know, pump stations and drainage, and these are much smaller systems. Would it be possible to look at incorporating those into our system in exchange for Larkspur paying for us to, you know, take over that aspect of flood control as it relates to Larkspur?
I'd have to look into that. I don't know. Yeah.
RJ, I'm not sure I forwarded it to you, but I spoke with a professor of engineering at Virginia Tech who studies INSAR satellite data, and he'd done some papers and some things that were published publicly. So I reached out to him, and he said he has coverage of Corte Madera starting in 1993, and the satellite passed over every 3 months. So he can do within a couple centimeters maps every 3 months from 1993 forward up until the present. So we could potentially look at 28 years of potential subsidence, and, you know, at whatever rate we wanted, and it would cover every surface in, you know, in Mariner Cove, for instance, every sidewalk and road crest. And I think the cost would be considerably less than those deep borings. I'm not sure how much, but he can give us a quote.
Yeah. So, and I'd be curious to understand the level of accuracy compared to LiDAR. I think it was in 2017 or 2019. The county with, I think it was the Golden Gate Bridge District, did a bunch of LiDAR work for all county. And we've been using it since, and it's been a great tool, and it's at the tips of our fingers, and I can show it to you on the screen if my bandwidth allow. Let me show you real quick. So, I mean, this is what LiDAR data looks like. And here on the left is, the elevations. So this is, although it's not NAVD elevations, it's mean high water plus. But these are accurate to what I'm told, at least 6 inches or less, which is great for planning and advanced planning. But, are we needing something more detailed in some of these key areas? And I think that's kind of the question before us at the moment.
Yeah, I think INSAR and LIDAR are similar in their vertical resolution. I don't remember which, but one of them tends to smooth convex surfaces and the one tends to smooth concave surfaces. So a lot of people use both of them in unison. There's software where you can resolve both of them and get even more accuracy. I can pass on his information, and I think it might be especially useful just because of the times available, that there's 28 years, 4 times a year. There's a lot of different areas that we could look at if we needed some data to fill in gaps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other thoughts on the master plan? So I would just like to make an observation. I try to monitor that K Passage pump station just to see how it's working, and generally it's been working, although there have been some glitches and there have been some expensive repairs and such on that. But that was sort of the prototype for future pumps that would be on the outfalls. If we eventually get people to recognize the need for a tide gate on San Clemente Creek that would only be closed at high tide, that would eliminate the need for a lot of these pump stations. We would just need the pump stations that then go to the open bay, such as the K Passage and the Eptide. So just a thought in regard to future flood control measures, not totally related to the storm drain master plan.
Yeah, and to respond a little bit to that, because I think the question was sent via email. I didn't know it was a, pilot type project, but it makes sense since it's, one of the only ones there. So, but it has been down for sometimes weeks at a time. Obviously, when it's down, we're on high alert and we're checking the rain and forecast to make sure that during this repair period, and often it goes down unexpectedly and it's down for 2 weeks. And so are we good while the pump's getting replaced or repaired, or do we need to bring and rent temporary pumps to account for the next event that's going to hit us right away before we get it repaired? And so it's happened probably at least 2 times, 3 times since I've been here, and been here, not even 4 years, just under. And so that is my one piece I would say is the pump stations are great when they work, but when they're down, it can be very nerve-wracking. And I think also it can maybe, it probably provides a lot of short-term benefits, but maybe doesn't help us in the long-term conversation. I think perhaps there's folks in the community that maybe would think everything is fine if they didn't see some of this ponding and flooding. And we heard some of that when we did the climate adaptation assessment. So I don't know, it's something that I haven't completely wrapped my head around, but I did want to share is as we invest in these surface improvements or pump stations, they do have a benefit, especially in the short term, but do we end up neglecting perhaps what is needed long term?
No, I think you're absolutely right. This was put in when Kelly Crow was chief engineer, and this was a result of the 2007 study. And the thought was that eventually you would need to put in a pump station at each outfall. Well, I think this pump station cost more, and then it has had some problems. So I guess in looking at it as the prototype, if we do have to put another pump station in, or what are the improvements that we would want to have in that so it doesn't suffer the same glitches that this one has. And you're right, it helps in the short run. In the long run, there's going to need to be some kind of tidal barrier behind these very low houses along Golden Hind, where that one is located, for it to be effective going forward. Any other questions from board members that have come up?
I have an admittedly naive question. I don't want to belabor this or take a lot of time, but RJ, that in this our community in Mariner Cove, there's been a ton of construction work on the existing houses, and most people are getting flood certificates to see where they are on their elevations for their houses. Is there anything that harvests the elevations that are coming off those for the city or town's use? Or is that kind of just two different things? They don't talk to each other that way.
No, I think there's value. And so we have those on file. And I think potentially there's a benefit in having those in one table that is visible and perhaps in a map. But I think even beyond that, expanding that, and this is kind of maybe more of a strategy that was brought up, prior, but having some sort of coordinated effort to not just compile those that have already done that, but perhaps coordinating an effort that picked up additional ones. And I think, I don't know, I think that would help people understand their own individual vulnerabilities to a lot of this. Yeah,
I'm just looking for free data. To the extent there's free data out there that we can use, but I imagine that it might not be as easy for us to compile it, even if it's, at the town.
Well, on the Planning Commission, when we're evaluating second stories, the Planning Department always puts out a list of all the second stories in the neighborhood, just to give a sort of comparison. So I think having this data, someplace would be fairly easy. We know then the number of houses that are at risk from flooding, even though the houses that are elevated don't necessarily get out of the flood zone, they at least get out of the danger zone from damage to the house, flooring, and such. So, there's still the potential for water that comes in around them. But I would agree. I think that would be useful information to have, just knowing the number of houses that have been raised and at what elevation.
And then, Brian, I don't know if your neighbors, when they were going through that effort, were paying a, excessive fee, but, if for some reason the monument network is not very good in that area, that would be something to consider if we want to invest in establishing some more monuments. Again, not the ideal spot to put them on areas that could be prone to settling, but it might help the community with education and helping them have access to those locations as well.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions with respect to the master plan. You showed us the budget, and I personally don't need to see, but I understand that there will be a schedule associated with each of those deliverables and the plan going forward. So I think that it would make sense if, whatever frequency you determine appropriate, along the life of the master plan, you keep us updated with respect to progress on the master plan, and then associated show where we are in the schedule and in the budget. It wouldn't be unheard of if we get either delayed or it costs more, right? I mean, I don't know any project that doesn't get delayed and costs more money than we originally planned. But it's a good idea to track on that and and share it so we can take action.
Yeah. So I believe we have two visits where the consultant will come and present and answer questions over the life of the project. And then in between those, myself and Chris and others can give, additional reports about kind of where we are and over the, roughly 2-year period.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't generate anything for the board, right? No need to add more cost. But once you, if and when you have the data, it would be good to share with the rest of us. Yeah. The other thing is that I noticed in the slide that you put before that there's a draft with a presentation, and then eventually the once that you collect all the comments, they will be finalized in the report. Will the board be given the opportunity to review that draft and that presentation? Once again, I wouldn't do anything for us, but if it's something that gets presented, should we participate?
So I think tentatively it would make sense. So big part of the effort and probably the bulk of the first year is going to be more of condition assessment and really just gathering, compiling the data, setting it up. But sometime around the completion of that is probably when Chris, myself, and the consultant team would come and do a presentation to Flood Board, somewhere around the halfway mark. Yeah. And then we would probably likely do a second presentation at the draft document phase. And then later, after Flood Board provides comments, then we would take it to council for a draft presentation and comment phase.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any final questions? Christian RJ, thank you for the presentation on that. Stephanie and I did get a chance to meet the consultants, and so I'm optimistic that we're going to get some good information and good planning, from this study.
Yeah, that was interesting. That was a good, quick tour.
Yeah. Okay. Before adjournment, want to see if there are any future agenda items that we'd like to think about. David Bell, I remember you sort of asking about how this master plan would relate to, our strategic plan and the climate adaptive assessment. Is that something you're thinking about?
Yeah. I would still like to see how it all fits, all the pieces fit together.
Yeah, I touched on a little bit to the extent I think I can without getting too deep into the climate adaptation, but I do view this as a big component on expanding our knowledge beyond kind of where we are on sea level rise and forecasts for that. And so I really think this just overall will give us a much stronger foundation should we push forward on future projects, a lot of the tougher ones that I think we all know about. So. But I guess, was there a request for a more thorough dialogue at a future meeting? Or I guess maybe I didn't fully understand the question in the email, but I don't know if we want to discuss that offline, David, or what the appropriate setting is.
Well, isn't there, in other correspondence, there's been reference to what I thought was another plan, another master plan? Or so are you referring to the strategic? Yeah, I think it was a strategic master plan or strategic plan. Right.
Yeah, so we that was a just to give you guys some information about some council public event, but in October, I believe it was, we set up it was a public meeting, but all of council attended, and it was really a dialogue, back and forth dialogue to discuss the upcoming 22 master plan. So we were in October 2021, starting to put that together, prepared a draft, received feedback on specific items that either were should be prioritized or not. And then those comments and comments from the public were then folded into a final strategic plan for the calendar year of 2022. And that went to council. And I don't know that it was an item that was voted on or anything, but it was basically, they gave us direction that, yep, that's where we want town staff to focus in the year of 2022. So that was in November. I don't recall if it was the first or second meeting in November, but by all means, that's available on our webpage, and the video recording is there too. But it does outline that framework of 2022 goals for the town.
I do think the idea of keeping the climate adaptive assessment in mind as we go through, future projects. There was a lot of pushback from neighbors in Mariner Cove in relationship to any kind of flood barrier. But since that's come out, or since that objection has come out, there have been a number of articles, publications about how flood barriers are being used in other communities to protect those communities. So there may be a sort of change in the way Mariner Cove residents look at this going forward if, they follow the science and the issue of potential for sea level rise.
Yeah, and I think I've seen some of those articles, but by all means, pass them along. We'll continue to compile them on our webpage and just have them for educational purpose for our community.
Okay. Any other thoughts for future agenda items, comments, final questions, thoughts?
I have a question. It's would it be possible that future packages that get distributed to the board incorporate the presentation that were provided at the time? The reason is because these are, you put a lot of effort on those, and they're very educational, and obviously I cannot remember everything that goes from one to the next, so I think that it would be available in the PDF. It would be helpful. They don't need to be sent ahead of time, right? They can be sent after the fact when the minutes get distributed as part of it.
Yeah, if we haven't been doing that, I apologize. I think that's been our intent, to post presentations, and then also we have the recordings and the minutes available. But yeah, after the fact is no problem. It does become challenging sometimes to get it all dialed in ahead of time, but after the fact, no big deal. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I tend to be on the other side of the question most of the days. So I always appreciate after the fact. That's really cool.
Yeah. So Chris, if we can check and make sure, not just for this meeting, but at least the ones from 2021, if we can make sure those are up and running on the webpage if you don't see them.
Yeah, I think we have been posting them. We just haven't been emailing them out to the flood board. So I can send you the link to where they're all posted.
Okay, great.
I think that'd be a great addition. Thanks, Raymond. Okay. Unless there's anything that RJ and Chris want to add, I think we're done.
Great. Well, nothing to add. Just see you guys again soon in 2022. And happy holidays.
Happy holidays to everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Thank you.
Happy holidays. Thank you.